next is Casey, who's going to do a nice little intro to the script tag for us. Thank you, Casey.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so like Mark was saying at the beginning, this is going to be a bit of a different kind of talk. First of all, my name's Casey. This is where you can find me. I'm a web developer at TrueHome, and I'm one of the organizers for Exchange.js. So this is going to be a bit of a different kind of talk. It's part of our JavaScript beginner series, but chances are, even if you are a beginner, you probably don't think about the script tag too much because you've probably written a hello world page or script that looks like this, and then you can kind of move on and put whatever you want inside of your script and move on and learn about regular expressions or something like that. And at the other end of the spectrum, if you're creating a super fancy single page application, maybe the initial markup you deliver to your users looks something like that, and you don't really have to think about the script tag at all. It just kind of, you know, renders where it renders, and you worry about errors in your JavaScript code and not about the HTML tag itself. But for the vast majority of the web and everything in between, this is not the norm. So I just made a quick list of some websites where I hang out and get the news from, and you know, most of them have dozens, if not more than 100 script tags on their homepage. And even our exchangejs.com site has 9. I have no idea why it has 9. I'd have to really rack my brain to figure out what all of those things are doing. So my point today is to kind of use script tags responsibly, because they, as I'll tell you about, it can have implications for the performance of your site and the security of your site or the security of your users. And there are also some new things in the spec that can help us with this. And so I hope that everybody can learn something tonight. I certainly picked up a few new things while I was researching this. So start at the beginning. There's basically 2 different ways you can use the tag. One, you can put some JavaScript in between the opening and closing tags and it will be executed. The second way, you can provide a source attribute and the browser will fetch an external script and execute it. Apart from the fact that you have to make an additional network request, these 2 are exactly equivalent. Assuming that the content of my script is the same as the content that's between the opening and closing tags, these work exactly the same way. I would not advise mixing the 2, however. It will work in some browsers, but it's inconsistent, and so you shouldn't do it. And also, you cannot self-close a script tag, even if it has a source attribute, and it seems like you should be able to do that. There's an interesting Stack Overflow on why that doesn't work. So the first thing to be aware whenever you're adding a script tag to your site is that it will pause the HTML parser, which is sort of the first step that's necessary for rendering your page, while it not only fetches the script tag, assuming that it's external, but also executes it. And so the reason why this decision was made in the history of the web is pretty easy to understand. Wherever the script tag occurs in your markup, it's very easy to predict what the state of the DOM will be at the time that JavaScript is executed. But this has a negative impact on performance. Fortunately, even though the HTML parser stops, the browser will still look ahead and make other network requests, so it doesn't sort of need to wait for each script tag to be downloaded and just move through the DOM making network requests in between. But this still can really slow down sites. So I looked at these same sites and just measured the time until the DOM content is loaded with and without JavaScript enabled in the browser. And you can see usually disabling JavaScript speeds things up by anywhere from 50% to about 70%, I think. So how can we get around this? Well, there's a well-known rule of thumb that you should put all of your script tags at the end of your markup, just before the closing body tag, and that can help. But there's also some newer attributes in HTML that can make it a little bit easier to think about. So first of all, if you add this async Boolean attribute to the script tag, it will not pause the HTML parser. It will fetch it and then pause it while the script executes. And you can also use the defer tag, which will perform the script fetch in parallel, and then wait until the whole page is done parsing before it actually executes. So just from looking at these, it seems like if you have like a sort of a normal server-side rendered website, that defer is actually, you know, the best of all worlds in terms of performance. You wait until everything loads and you don't start executing your JavaScript until then. And in fact, I think it's in the references at the end, this is borne out in the wild. You get fastest rendering if you use the defer tag on all of your script. Another thing to be aware of whenever you're using a script tag is that even though these are separate scripts, the main body, any variables you declare within the main body are shareable between two different tags. So any variable you declare in the main body is sort of assigned to the global scope, and they can access each other. So even though these are two different scripts or two different tags, if I click this trick or treat button, the lower script will be able to access a variable within the upper script. So what can you do about this? Well, one trick that's been utilized for a long time is to wrap any code within a script tag in what's called an immediately executing anonymous function. So this works just like the script tag in the upper example, in that this is wrapped in a function, but because I have these closing braces at the end, it will just execute on its own. I don't need to call it from anywhere. But even though I've done that, this variable is not accessible to anything outside of that function because it's confined to its own scope. So here, if I click the button, nothing happens. And in fact, if I open up the console, you can see I'm getting an error there. Now I have to get out of here.
Top rate X.
Sorry?
Top rate X. Close it. In the event debugger.
Oh. Oh, over here. Okay, so just like with async and defer, there are some new things in the spec that can help us with this. So in this case, what I've done is replace the type of the script. Up till now, implicitly, it's always been text/JavaScript. Now I've replaced that with a module. And so any variables declared within a module are private to that module. And so just like before, I won't open the console because I can't remember how to close it. But if I were to, you'd see that there would be errors there as well. Okay, can you put other things in the type attribute? This is sort of a little aside, but in fact you can. If you leave the type attribute out, it's assumed to be text/JavaScript. You can, of course, use module. You can also put other things there, so you could use the script tag for something else and parse it with JavaScript, or you can use it to provide like JSON hints to search engines. So you'll see other types of script tags that are not in fact JavaScript, but anytime it's left out, it's assumed to be JavaScript and will be executed like that. In this case, since I've included this, something which is not JavaScript, the browser just doesn't understand it. Okay, but now let's go back and talk a little bit more about modules. So you might be familiar with them from using Webpack or Browserify, which allow you to write different pieces of JavaScript that behave as independent entities but can share data with each other. But now these are starting to be picked up by browsers, and it's possible in some cases to use them natively as well. So in this case, I've defined a module as an external script, and it's exporting a couple of different attributes. An array, which is called types of candy, and then by default, it's exporting this function, which will pick one at random. So I can import either of these things into another module, and in this case, I've just assigned the function to pick candy to the button click. So if I had not exported both of these things would be private and wouldn't be shareable. But in this case, I can import it. And in this case, I've picked out toothpaste. Who said toothpaste? Yeah.
Where is the name Pick Candy coming from here?
Where is the name Pick Candy? Okay, so
Oh, export default, is that?
yeah. Okay, so yeah, actually I'm glad you asked that because that brings up the point. So I've exported the function as default, and so I've basically just assigned whatever default is to Pick Candy. But this, because it has its own name, I have to specify that that's what I'm importing, and that's why it's between the curly braces, because it's not the default thing that's being exported. Okay, so can you use modules today? Yeah, you can use Webpack or Browserify. So what those tools will do when they encounter a module is sort of wrap them in those anonymous functions that I was talking about. So they'll behave exactly like modules, but they'll kind of package all your modules together into a script that can be understood by any browser. Are we going to get to the point where we can use native? Oh, one more thing. Browser support so far is mixed, but you can use the no module tag on a script to support older browsers. So you could provide some modules and some no module scripts to your client so that you could sort of get the best of both worlds.
How does that work? So like, does the no module just say, like, if
you're a browser that
don't load this kind of?
Yeah, that doesn't understand module, or if you're a browser that does understand modules, then it won't execute the no module script, but other browsers will just ignore it. Yeah. So are there any other barriers to using native modules so far? Probably if you've worked on a large JavaScript project, you've noticed that you tend to use a lot of modules, both your own code as well as third-party scripts. And in this case, if you look at the way that this is written, every import or every external module that you're including is going to be another HTTP request. But probably HTTP2 is going to help us out a little bit here because it actually works better making lots of small HTTP requests instead of like one giant one, which is kind of the way that we've optimized delivery of JavaScript and CSS today. Another thing I found interesting is that you can only import a URL. So if you use NPM, if you install NPM packages, they all go into this node modules folder, and you can kind of like directly import anything within that folder right into your project without worrying about the exact path. But because this is natively included in the browser, it doesn't understand node modules, it doesn't understand package.json, so it's always got to be a direct link to a URL. So that's going to be a harder problem to get around for using modules as sort of a replacement for any kind of preprocessor, I think.
Like absolute or relative from the current?
I mean, either one, but it still has to be, a
You
path.
still have to publish your modules explicitly on your website.
Exactly, or expose your entire node modules folder or something like that. So I don't know how that would work. Probably there will still be some sort of preprocessor which will, at least transpile the paths together or something like that.
I know one nice thing that I've seen with modules is that they use it because all of the browsers that have implemented modules so far also support a whole ton of other features. The kind of base set of safe features to use in a module is a lot broader.
Right, yeah.
You can use in the browser.
Yeah, so you can basically write ES6 and not have to worry about transpiling it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's something that I hadn't thought about. All right, so this is some of the places where I got the information for this talk. Jake Archibald has a really thorough write-up on how modules will work natively. Gil Taylor kind of breaks down these issues about all these multiple requests and how you would actually go about using modules today. And then this by Steve Souders is a really nice break. Oops, I didn't mean to click on that, but that's fine. It's a really nice breakdown of why defer works better than async in the wild and why it's really the preferable attribute for doing that type of thing. So that's all I've got. Any questions, Roberto?
Is there a rule if you're putting the script at the top or the bottom? Like you use defer or async?
Well, it doesn't really matter. If you use defer, you can pretty much put it anywhere and it will still be executed at the very end. So in a way, it's actually preferable to use it at the top because then you don't have to wait for the network. By the time it encounters that tag, or as soon as it encounters that tag and knows it's going to need it, the browser can go ahead and fetch it. So with defer, I would say put it at the top. With async, I think like the advantage of async is that you can execute your JavaScript earlier, and so there could be an advantage to doing that, but I think it needs to be thought about much more carefully.
So if you're fetching multiple scripts in
Yeah.
async fashion, do you know which one gets executed first?
Yeah, so with async, I think whichever one comes back first gets executed first. So you really need to be careful about it. With defer, they will be executed in the same order that they're written in the markup. So that's another advantage to defer. Oh, one thing I didn't mention is that the module type is always defer by default. So you don't have to worry about it.
So do you have an idea of what browsers are supporting defer and async?
I believe all modern browsers are supporting defer and async. Module is much newer and it's like, I think it's just WebKit browsers at this point.
I think it's right now it's Apple, like the Safari browser, and Chrome
Yeah.
both do in their stable release.
Module, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I saw Edge's beta just last week released that they have supported the beta now. For
Okay,
I don't know.
all right.
Does anyone know Firefox does module right now? No, I'm seeing head shaking.
No, it doesn't.
I use a Python, when I'm writing Python, I use a library that basically compiles all my scripts into one.
Right.
Only one script tag.
Right.
Is there a disadvantage to doing that?
Yeah, so you're delivering a giant bunch of data to over the wire to your user. With HTTP1, that's probably the best way to do it most of the time because it's faster if you make one call. There are ways though, like depending on how your app works, you may not need to give it all to your users at once. So there are ways you could sort of break it up and modularize it. So when they come to the home page or something, they only get enough of the JavaScript to make that part of the application work. So does that make sense? So then you can get it to them faster and maybe onboard your users better.
Okay, well, I would only deliver the ones they need anyway. But,
Right.
But you're saying with HTTP2, it might be just as well to leave them separate.
It may be better to leave them separate because it does work better for delivering lots of smaller files.
Guys, we're just going to pass the microphone just because we're losing a lot of questions on the recordings. So just pass it over here.
Sorry, I just wanted to chip in. The Safari has module support enabled, but all of the other major browsers, you can turn it on, but don't expect
Your users to turn it on, yeah.
Latest Chrome. Okay, so Chrome 60 had it behind the flag, but latest Chrome has it on.
And the Edge 16 has it on.
Yeah, but Edge 15 you need a flag.
Yeah.
John, Firefox 54 flag.
Were there any more questions for Casey? All right, why don't we wrap it there? Casey, you got it, right?
Maybe.
So thank you very much, Casey.
Exchange.js is Edmonton's JavaScript meetup. Thanks to our sponsors, Jobber and Investopedia. Support the meetup and like and share this video, and stay informed by following us on Twitter and meetup.com. Links in the description. See you soon!